Hi everybody, welcome to the virtual premiere of Ser Mujer en Latinoamérica documentary map. This is gonna be the English version. I will walk you through this specific investigation, this 3-year independent research, and we are very excited. This is a voluntary work by myself. I'm Natalia Bonilla. I am an international media producer. I have been producing also 2 documentaries prior to this one, IT Espera in 2011 and Ecos del Exilio in 2013. And today I'm very excited to share with you the virtual premiere of Ser Mujer en Latinoamérica map, which began in June 2017 with an online survey to showcase the different degrees of gender-based violence that women were experiencing in the Latin American region. What happened afterwards was something that took us on a whole new journey to experience what is womanhood like at a personal level, as well as a professional and journalistic level. So today we are going to be presenting to you the final results of this investigation. The ebook will showcase all the different reports from each country, as well as all the data project that we've been focusing on in terms of methodology created by our associate producer, Maria del Consuelo Torija. That will be shared with you on December 15 when we launch officially the website of this investigation. And we are very excited for all of you that donated on our crowdfunding campaign between September and October this year, because you've made this website and all this investigation come to fruition thanks to you. So thank you so much for supporting this project. And today we are going to be showing you the final results. This is going to be a virtual presentation in Spanish, but I will translate afterwards, so don't worry about it. Thank you so much for tuning in, and let's begin. De marzo de 2017, recibí un golpe en el corazón. En aquel entonces, cubría la marcha feminista en Ciudad de México como periodista independiente para un periódico británico, cuando entre las activistas se corría la voz de lo que sucedía en Guatemala. Busqué en mi teléfono y encontré la noticia del incendio de Hogar Seguro en San José de Pinula. Algo me dijo que debía llegar allí, reportar lo que estaba ocurriendo. El feminicidio institucional que cegó las vidas de 43 niñas. Nunca supe por qué la historia que cumplía con todos los requisitos para los medios de comunicación de repente no era importante. Era muy cruel, muy triste, muy local. Como productora de 2 documentales independientes, inicié en junio de 2017 una encuesta que difundía a través de las redes sociales para ver si había resonancia, si es que acaso las mujeres en el continente experimentábamos diferentes formas de violencia de género. En menos de un mes alcanzamos 392 testimonios, y así inició esta investigación de 3 años que me llevó a profundizar en mi propia experiencia de vida y a aprender a valorar la pluralidad de voces, la riqueza y discriminación colonial e interseccional. Nunca me planteé qué era ser mujer, y mucho menos cuán complicado era hacerlo en Latinoamérica, el Caribe o mi natal Puerto Rico. Nunca me planteé cuán engranada estaba la violencia de género estructural en la industria periodística, el aparato estatal o la política internacional. Ser mujer en Latinoamérica se convirtió en un mapa de 693 relatos de mujeres en 18 países del continente y el Caribe, con patrones similares y desfases sobre su nivel de autorreconocimiento. A muchas de ustedes las conocí en esta travesía en eventos virtuales, presenciales, entrevistas y viajes. Ser mujer en Latinoamérica no busca ser representativo de todas las realidades de quienes se consideran féminas en esta región. Para eso haría falta mayores recursos, equipo, alcance, influencers y apoyo multisectorial. Por eso este mapa es hoy simplemente una puerta a atravesar. Mi nombre es Natalia Bonilla y soy la productora de esta tercera producción independiente que transformó mi vida en más de una forma y que hoy presentamos gracias a todas las personas que valoran el gran poder que tienen las historias, nuestras historias.
Mi nombre es María del Consuelo Torija Luna, soy de la ciudad de Puebla, México, soy internacionalista, feminista y formo parte de la colectiva Temat Cuba. Hace casi 3 años empecé a involucrarme en el activismo y por mis compañeras de carrera llegué a este cuestionario. Ese fue un momento clave para mí, pues el movimiento feminista empezó a tener mayor resonancia en mi entorno y con eso se empezaba a reconocer la violencia de género y con la situación que surgía en toda Latinoamérica. Me sentí atraída por esta convocatoria, pues en ese momento mi mayor interés era saber si en serio todas sufrimos lo mismo, ya que era increíble de reconocer en ese momento. El año pasado invitamos a Natalia para que diera un taller y pude ver los avances del mapa documental, así como todo el contexto por el que surgió el mapa. Este año coincidí con Natalia en una cumbre y le mandé mensaje para preguntar por un proyecto y tuve la fortuna de ser considerada para apoyar en este mapa. Tuve la responsabilidad de darle forma y entender los testimonios de otras mujeres y personas que confiaron sus vivencias y percepciones. Después de este trabajo, me interesa pasar a otro nivel. Quisiera saberlo todo sobre las luchas, actividades y acciones que estamos haciendo en América Latina, ya que soy optimista ante lo que hacemos y por el cambio que estamos provocando. Pues aunque parezca un llano enorme, hacia atrás a las primas, y sé que vamos por el camino correcto, pues el cambio ya está empezando a verse en las generaciones que están atrás de nosotras.
So that is the initial presentation. Just to give you a bit of heads up in the English language, we began this investigation in June 2017 after a media coverage, an independent media coverage of the femicides, the institutional femicides of 43 girls in San Jose de Pinula, Guatemala. I traveled there after covering the Mexico City Women's Day March, 8th of March of 2017. And I experienced a lot of no's from media organizations and newspapers that I used to report on as a freelancer, saying that the story was too local, too cruel, too sad to run it through. And these were the same people that months before international editors were telling me that in order to run stories from the peace process in Colombia, I needed to showcase crying women victims on camera for them to run my story and to publish my report. So when this news struck in Guatemala, I was wondering why 43 girls, the killing of 43 girls in this fire on a public shelter, were too cruel to run or too sad to run. And I wonder whether women were valued the same, or whether, depending on their country of origin or their quantity, the number of women that are being subjected to violences, it depends how much relevant or important running a story on them is. So that's what inspired me to run this survey, online survey via Twitter and then Facebook. I am not an influencer. I just, publish, like, thinking maybe 4 or 5 people will respond. But the survey became viral, and in 1 month, we reached 392 testimonials from women in 18 countries. Then I began a whole new different journey that some of you may already know in the crowdfunding campaign that I share with you all the details, where I approached international organizations, feminist organizations that were telling me that 392 testimonials were not representative of women around the continent that I needed to reach 500 in order for them to look at my research. And then I reached 500, after a couple of months trying to reshare it and asking people to continue sharing it across their platforms. And they said that 500 women were not enough, that if I reached 1,000, they would look at my report. And at that time, I was wondering, are you asking the same, kind of quantity to men or male researchers, or are you just asking people that do not have the resources? Because I don't have a team, I'm just a single freelance person. And I started working on structural gender violence and how even these top international institutions have instill some pressure on people that do not have the means in order for their research to be seen or deemed as good. So I started this project and began working on its analysis on my own, and started engaging on the whole dozens of interviews that you will find on the YouTube channel. I did some webinars. I traveled to some of these countries to meet the women that joined the webinar, the survey, and I met them in person and I interviewed them in person. And it was a very meaningful process for me as women as well, to meet with them and to connect on a whole different level than what we are shown as journalists. And it really struck a chord and made me understand that this documentary map is not going to be representative of all the realities of all the women in Latin America. For that, we will need resources, equipment, techie stuff, and maybe some allies in top institutions, and a whole different support on a multi-sectoral level. So we are not trying to showcase that. What we did with Maria del Consuelo Torija, she's an IR specialist here in Mexico. She developed the methodology for the data journalism project that we pursued this year to, end this research. And what we did together was trying to find patterns in the narratives of these testimonials, and trying to find also like some glimpses of what to move from the cycle of violence on a discourse level, as well as on a recognition, a self-recognition level. So this is what you will see today. And we are very grateful for all the support that you have given to this independent research project. We know that this is a very big conversation. Today we are marking the International Day against the elimination elimination of violence against women. We are in November 25th, so I'm so excited that you are here and that you're joining us in this commemoration with these important results. So we are gonna be sharing with you three main final conclusions of this research. If you like the audio version, I have recorded an episode, a full episode on our Womenhood and International Relations podcast, showcasing this, but in a short, brief level, in case you don't want to see the video. So I will list them also on the email that we will send this recording. Okay, so without further ado, we are gonna be sharing with you three final results of the whole documentary map. And once again, if you're interested in specific cases, in specific dynamics, then I invite you to be on the lookout for December 15, when we are gonna be launching the website and the ebook. The ebook is gonna be in the Spanish version, but we are gonna be open, and you are more than welcome to share with me your questions in English. So I'm very excited for you to be here. In this first part of this documentary research project, we wanted to showcase you what are the experiences, the gender-based violences experiences that women are facing around the region, and what are the ways that they are using, what are the narratives that they are using to share what they perceived is violence. Our study was it was about like 693 testimonials from women in 18 countries on the ages of 18 to 25. That was 49.4% of all participants. Between the ages of 26 and 40 years old, that was the 42.9% of all participants of our study, and more than 40 years old were the 7.7% in our survey. The level of education of our participants, the majority of them had a bachelor's degree. The second majority had a master's degree. The third level of study was a high school level, and a small portion were doctorate level. In our methodology created by Maria del Consuelo Torija, she's our associate producer, we were trying to harness on the power of 9 main questions of the survey. We had 9 questions regarding how are you experiencing gender-based violence in your country or in other places around the region? To your judgment, what are the public policies at the national level that are affecting women the most? If any, what are the laws or the actions of your current government, current administration in your country that worry you the most, and why? What are the political actions and peace initiatives that you consider that are good to eradicate gender-based violence in your country? In terms of gender inequality on a political, economic, or social level, what are the actions or initiatives or peace initiatives that you consider are efficient to fight against it? What are your views on the discourses of national press or national or international media about gender-based violence that women experience in your country or in other parts of Latin America? What is your perception on how we suffer and how we fight against gender-based violence in the continent? If any, can you identify which countries in Latin America and the Caribbean region are creating a precedent in the fight against gender violence and gender inequality? Which countries also worry you the most and why? So in our questionnaire, we started analyzing the testimonials and started coding, which are falling into several categories. We started figuring out what are the keywords that kept repeating over and over, and what are the general themes that most of our participants were continuing saying in their whole discourse of the whole survey mapping. Then we proceeded to a quantitative analysis where we engage in the processing of all the data that kept repeating itself, and then we started graphicizing or creating graphics on themes, keywords, countries, and as well as a general overview. That's what we're going to be seeing today. In the terms of gender-based violence, how do you experience violence in your region or in your country? We started finding 8 levels of conversation of categories. The symbolic or ideologic violence, which included language, thinking, ideology, culture, and superstructure. The personal level in terms of the body itself, the psychological level, and the interpersonal experience, the intimate or family level, which included family members, friendships, as well as relationships and couples. The level of work and education, whether they experience gender-based violence in the universities or their schools, or through a specific curriculum or specific way of teaching stuff, or work discrimination, gender pay gap, etc. The public space, which was the the street harassment mostly. The community, it means like all the collectives level, the state in terms of institutions and the current administration or government administration, and the international level, more specifically in terms of dynamics that we can find at the region level. So in our survey, what we found is that there up to 375 testimonials from our participants were mostly talking about symbolic violence. And this is very important because what we found throughout all this study was that participants were able to identify, because the question was so open, they were able to identify more than one type of violence that they have experienced throughout their whole life. And the majority of them talk about ideologic violence or symbolic violence, followed by street harassment or harassment in public spaces, and follow on a third level on their immediate environment and their family or paternal or relationships, um, um, the relationships. So these are like the top levels where they have experienced violence. We are showing here 5 realms where the words kept repeating themselves. So in terms of the body, more than 49 people were talking about sexual abuse, were subjected to sexual abuse. 295 women were subjected to harassment. 26 were discriminated through age. 76 were touched inappropriately on a physical level without explaining whether it was sexual or was it like a hitting, etc. 62 were talking about psychological violence that affected how their body was portrayed. 175 said sexual abuse, specifically, not only abuse, but sexual abuse. And of course, there's a thing about language barrier, because in English we can trace abuse to sexual abuse, but in Spanish it is important to say what kind of abuse, because it could be, in the Spanish language, abuso could be psychological abuse, or it could be emotional abuse, or it could be sexual abuse or physical abuse. Then on the symbolic level, we have commentaries, we have discrimination, we have micromachisms, or small forms of macho culture being ingrained in several comments, verbal abuse. On the private level and relationship level, we also had a very high concentration of people that, or participants that were saying that the perpetrators of violence or abuse were from the family, from the couple or the current partners, and their relationships, and their mother or the father, or on their households. On the public and productive level, in terms of economy, we find that through their schoolmates or their work partners, the school or their workplaces, they experience violence, and through their professors as well. On the street level, we also find what are the ways that street harassment affected women the most, and it was through the looks, it was through the comments, the slur comments, or the flirtings, the unsolicited flirtings, through the public transport, as well as going out to hang out at some place. In terms of the question, what are the laws and the actions that your current administration, government administration in your country worry you the most and why? We found that most women in our survey, once again, this is not representative of all realities of all women across the continent, and we did not have a specific question of whether or not a woman was born like women. So any person that considered themselves women were open to fill out this survey. So I just wanted to make that disclaimer. So in terms of what worry, the public policies that worry women the most in our survey, the high majority of them consider security, education, and health were the ones that worry them the most. And in terms of what the current administration was doing, what worried them the most was in terms of politics and security. So here we are seeing some misalignments that are very interesting. We have featured here most of all the people that were presidents of the countries that we showcase in our documentary were mostly male, male on charge. In terms of government actions of the current administration that worry women the most, they were talking about politics, justice, femicides, abortion, gender, and security. It is important to note that one of the best highlights that this documentary has is that it showcases the extent to which the Ni Una Menos movement and the Aborto Legal feminist movements and feminist marches are doing on women and how they shaped their perception on what are the current events that they should focus on. So we see here on the Ni Una Menos movement, because they were talking about the high levels of personal or physical violence and the geologic or symbolic violence, as well as the public spaces and the street harassment, and what could lead to proper threatening of their security. The impunity or the high impunity levels or the lack of justice for femicides, that's something that continue repeating over and over in our documentary. It is important to note here we have showcased you some statistics from each country in terms of femicides, annual femicides per country. Brazil with the highest number, Mexico follow on second, and Colombia follow on third. It is important to know that these are statistics from local observatories on femicides, and they sometimes change depending on the authorities' tracking of these femicides. And it is important to note two things. At first, that not all femicides that are femicides are categorized as such in the region, so these numbers may probably be higher or probably be different if we consider every type of femicide as it is. And the second is that in Mexico, there's a huge shift, because here is the word feminicide, which is a whole different phenomenon that we do not see other countries in the region being referred to. They refer to as femicide. So it is important to know that there are two phenomena taking place in Mexico that we are showcasing here. In the terms of the local observatory of Mexico, we feature feminicides, not femicides. In terms of indicators of the UN Development Fund, we found a report of 2018, which we are using for the following indicators that we are gonna showcase you also on the ebook of this report. And we found these incredible indicators on the lack of security, the type of trust that men versus women have on each country, and the high levels of impunity. And we can see the rates going up on Ecuador, Honduras, and there are several shifts on Chile and on Mexico, where men are often more trustful on the government and on the justice institutions than women. And these shifts are very, very present. In terms of gender equality, we also find that the annual the public expenditure on education, on the percentage of the GDP of each country is very low. However, the quality of education is very different depending on each country and on the level of satisfaction. Once again, this is according to the UNDP 2018 IDH report. And it is important to note that in the case of Chile, in the case of Brazil, in the case of Colombia, they have higher levels of public expenditure on education. However, they have the lowest number or percentage of satisfaction on the quality of this education. We also find it as well on Uruguay, on Venezuela, which we don't have specific percentage of the expenditure, the public expenditure on education. So we lack those numbers, and we couldn't trace, whether or not it is connected. But we start seeing some misalignments, and also in terms of the level of participation of women versus men in the workforce, we find that we are still very behind, still catching up to like a 75% in most cases, with the lowest cases being Mexico, Guatemala, as well as Costa Rica. In terms of the how much women earn versus men, the gender pay gap, we are still at the whole continent being paid half to what men earn by 2011 statistics of the PPA. We will feature this on the report of the ebook with all the resources and references for you to look at. But we wanted to showcase in the cases of, for example, Dominican Republic, and as well as Guatemala, where men are earning more than double than women, and it could be like seen as up to 3 times what women earn, and this is incredibly concerning. In terms of legal abortion movements and feminist movements across the continent, what we found is that we found the rate of health issues very strong due to the present green wave, which is considered the green wave for the legalization of abortion. And we wanted to showcase different expenditures on the health according to each country's percentage of GDP in 2015. And what we found is that the higher numbers of countries that have public expenditure on health, like Brazil and Chile, as well as Peru and Venezuela, but specifically in the cases of Brazil and Chile, have the higher number or percentage of expenditure, but the lowest percentage of satisfaction of the quality of medical assistance and medical health services. In the cases of Venezuela and Uruguay, we found other dynamics due to the crisis, specific Venezuela and Peru specifically, sorry, not Uruguay. And it depends, because this was, of course, prior to the pandemic. These are reports prior to the pandemic, and this documentary was made between 2017 and 2019. So we do not feature what the current pandemic has created on women and how they are experiencing this differently. And to end this part of the research, it is important to note that in the terms of health, not only was the legal abortion or the decriminalization of abortion an issue that kept on repeating and that was worrisome for women in our survey, but also obstetric violence, as well as the cultura de estrupo, or like the rape culture or the harassment culture in Brazil. These were two things, as well as the lack of sexual and reproductive access and services, specifically in the cases of Venezuela, where personal hygiene and wash products were, due to the heightened political and economic crisis in this country, were incredibly worrisome for our participants. Okay, so what did we learn on this first part of this documentary? What we found is that throughout all this research, what we considered kept on repeating itself was Seligman's theory on the learned apprehension or the learned indefension. When women consider that they do not have any choice but to be subjected to violence, it's like we are defenseless to the violence that is being imposed upon us. So we see it over and over, and here we showcase you some of the testimonials where just women are hopeless and believe that they they are subjected to violence as objects, not being able to have a role in allowing violence or in stopping violence from happening. We also saw, and we think is one of the best things of this documentary is the level of recognition of women on who they are, their identity. Through their testimonials, they are able to self-recognize on several levels, but they also are able to recognize structural violence. And when start naming, like, what are the policies, what are the state behaviors that are continuing harming women. For example, the case of Puerto Rico, where I'm coming from, that the Promesa law was considered a specific structural gender violence tactic, because most of the services against services for the most vulnerable populations, including programs directed to women's health and education, were cut, and their funds were cut. And also the gender perspective curriculum was also harmed due to the colonial relationship. We also find similar things happening in Chile as well as in Colombia, where girls and participants um, showcase, hey, there's structural violence happening, but they do not necessarily pinpoint how. And we start, like that's something to be um, consider an area of opportunity for all of you researchers out there, for you to start digging deeper and finding out where could it hit the most. In the case of Paraguay, we see that structural violence, some of our participants from Paraguay, as well as Bolivia, we found similar things happening in Bolivia, in Ecuador, and Brazil. They were talking specifically on gender-based violence at the structural level affecting indigenous women. So that's something to be considered for future research. What we also found was a trend or similar trends on the way that women express themselves about the violence that affected them and other women. And the way that they approach testimonials on gender-based violence is by minimalizing or downplaying what gender-based violence experiences they had. Is like, I got harassed, but I know that other women experience it worse, and they start comparing themselves to other women's experiences, and they start downplaying, or they start high planes, I think is in English, or creating more when talking about others. And this is something that we consider it is interesting, but also it is worrisome, because they do not find value in the testimony itself, because they downplay themselves in the process, and we can correlate it through the the learned intervention, as well as other dynamics to work on, which is the paternalistic view, or the systemic psychology, or how ingrained is the macho culture within us. So that's something to be looked further. If you're interested, we can engage in a conversation on a Q&A. Please let me know, and we can organize an event for that. Another thing that we found in the testimonials are very, very interesting, and is an area of opportunity. We talked earlier about the self-level the level of self-recognition that women have through the testimonial by having a very wide open question. And what we found is that intersectionality, it is still a novel concept to explore in the self-awareness process of what are the violences that we are experiencing due to our several categories of gender identity or ethnicity or class or country of origin, etc. We do not have many cases in our documentary. We have up to a dozen where women self-identify which are the violences that happen to them because of all these intersectional elements. So that is rich, but also is an area of opportunity for future researchers. If you're interested in, working towards, helping women to understand and to pinpoint what is the level of self-recognition, etc. Another thing that we found that is worrisome through all these gender-based violence testimonials is that there's still a widespread trend that we do not name the perpetrators of these violences. So that continues to be like silent actors that perpetrate violence against us, but we fail to name them we are very aware that this is an online survey and people don't necessarily want to write the specific name of the person or the people, but by saying, street harassment, period, it loses a bit of accountability and responsibility on who's making that harassment. Is it men? Is it specific type of men? Or what are the government policies under which states men are doing, harm against women? So the perpetrators continue to be invisible in a sense, and that contributes as well to not holding accountability on who's making what and why. On our second part of this documentary, we wanted to focus on the collective imaginaries that we are being taught, that we continue reproducing, and that we continue to construct every day as women, as feminists, as movements, and also as the press. We wanted to harness on the power of the press to contribute to symbolic violence. And in this case specifically, what we found is that many women, there is a worrisome that by denouncing gender-based violence and media trying to instill, trying to report gender-based violence, we continue re-victimizing women and not necessarily, breaking the cycle of violence. So that's an area of opportunity that we found. Here, as a journalist, of course, this is something that really strikes home because we have been focusing on the need for gender responsible or gender perspective journalism or gender sensitive journalism. But I find also that there needs to be conversation and trainings on peace journalism and conflict resolution journalism, which is under Johan Galton's way of naming the causes and trying to work not only on the solutions and the patches, but also what are the root causes of the problems of the conflicts that we engage on daily. So what we found on the terms of the press and regarding the question on what do you think the narratives of the national press or international press about gender-based violence are affecting women or are framing women, what we found was 3 levels of work is that women were able to call out the subject, the cause of media coverage, the way that they are doing, and the adjectives, how they name it. So we started working on these 3 levels. On the subject level, naming the cause of media coverage, we found that there was the macho culture very ingrained in media institutions, and there was also a call of some participants that were saying in countries like Ecuador, Brazil, Colombia, as well as Mexico, where political parties or government institutions or even religious institutions had a very strong hold on the media conglomerates, and that affected as well the type of media coverage that they instill, regardless of whether or not the journalists themselves could have done gender sensitive reporting trainings. The directive level or the high level people were directing something else in terms of, oh, these are the headlines to run, to feed a specific vision, which is kept on being repeated over and over in our documentary. The lack of gender perspective, the shame culture that kept on being repeating. So these are the things that these specific participants in our documentary consider to be the causes of media coverage on gender-based violence. How do they do it? It is by re-victimizing, by justifying violence, by minimalizing or invisibilizing women's experiences, or deeming them as she's just too hysteric, etc. Culpabilizing or shaming women, or holding them as guilting women, and criminalizing them for the violences that subjected them, which, if you remember on our first part of this presentation, it correlates as well with this sensation of the learned indefension. Is that, of course, if the media view of us is that we are guilty of the violence subjected to us, then we are not seen as subjects, we are being seen as objects. Therefore, the way that we narrate our experiences is similar to what the media is trying to instill upon us. So that is an area of study that is very, very interesting for all of you researchers out there, that will find very interesting to dig deeper. And in our ebook, we will engage more further on this topic. It is very important to note that there were some women that did highlight that there were some alternative media and some good media doing good job on reporting gender-based violence. So not everything was, bad or, glimpse, but these are the things that we found struck the most, up to 70-80% of all the participants. And then the objective is that because media causes are instilling major culture and ingraining that women are guilty, and therefore we re-victimize them and we vilify them, then therefore we consider the media to be morbid, to be misogynistic, to be saddened, a sad thing, and to be machist or sexist. It is important to note that the way that we perceive the world is mostly through media. We do not have, like a whole understanding of what's happening on a country unless we tune on the news, or we read a newspaper, or we watch, like a YouTube channel or a social media news updates, etc. So we're very ingrained, our view of the world is very ingrained through the media lenses. So that is why it's so important to engage on a conversation on how media is portraying gender-based violence, and in the way re-victimizing or helping eradicate these social problem. In terms of what is your perception on how we suffer and how we fight gender-based violence on the region, there is this perception that we suffer in a negative level. But most of our participants, like almost half of our participants, did not want to answer that question. But in terms of fight, all of them responded, and we had mixed reviews on the fight, how we fight gender-based violence on the region. And this we consider to be an area of opportunity for feminist movements, because there are mixed feelings towards the feminist fight. We had positive ratings, we have mixed ratings, and we have negative ratings, and as well as a high number of people that consider that they did not want to respond to that question. In terms of how we suffer in the country, I mean, it is expected that we consider suffering as something very sad or very negative. However, what we found is that through several repetitions of narratives, women are considering themselves to be doomed and to look at this gender-based violence as this monster problem that they cannot ever solve. So they look at their life as, you know, with a pessimistic view. This is very important to know because in the mindset level, if it's connected to a low level, low emotional connection, then it can definitely showcase areas of work in terms of value, self-worth of women. We also found that women describe their suffering on a third person level and on a plural sense. So we suffer as women. So there's not a conversation of I have suffered personally, therefore the tendency or the trend is to generalize the suffering as something that is collective. We suffer because we are women. And this is good, and this is worrisome as well, because we found from the beginning that there's an absence not only of the perpetrator, but also on their self-recognition as subjects. But, you know, like they approach violence from an object level, not from a subject level. So what are the key areas of opportunities? And we're finishing this presentation. Key areas of opportunities on the feminist fight. There are mixed feelings on and mixed perspectives on the feminist fight. The first one, we divided them in three for this presentation. The first one is that we suffer the fight. That's a question. Are we suffering the fight? Because it feels like we are fighting David versus Goliath, and that we are not being heard. And even if we fight, it is never enough. And there is like this sense of oblivion of all the previous feminist fights and all the previous feminist movements in each country regards to gaining women's rights or human rights, you know, in the past century. So that gets forgotten, and there is this sense that what's happening now is just simply enough, and it will never be enough. The second thing that we find is that there is mixed feelings in terms of how these feminist movements and feminist fights are being projected and who's taking charge. There's a growing conversation that there's not inclusion in the feminist movements that are taking soar, that it is not representative of all women, and that continue to be white, middle class, or high middle class women, white women that are carrying the movement through liberal lenses and not the colonial or intersectional or anti-racist lenses. So that's an area of opportunity to look upon. Lastly, for our presentation, we wanted to focus on what are the solutions that our participants consider could eradicate gender-based violence. And we found that there's a growing trend on two ways that our participants approach solutions or peace initiatives. They consider on a higher degree that the state is the responsible for enforcing peace initiatives or actions to eradicate gender-based violence. This is a bit worrisome because it is not engaging on a whole holistic view of different actors and their roles in ensuring that the elimination of gender-based violence gets done. So we found two ways of approaching for them. In one level is through education, and the other level is through public policy. And these are like some of the trends, but we are gonna look at it very further. when we are talking about education and public policy, mostly is connected to gender perspective and gender equality education through activities such as arts, trainings, campaigns, education at the school or university level, communication, and publicity. So we start seeing that there needs to happen a mindset shift through the re-education of the system, and in which spaces this should be done at a higher degree. Up to 50% of our participants consider it needs to be through school, then through the home or the household, the university, the media, and the streets, or public spaces. Then on the public policies that they consider should take place, we started seeing this trend on conversation, because women are seen as victims. They are considered subjects, non-subjects of full rights, and they are considered citizens of second category. These are like the ways that they approach public policy. We need laws, and we need public policies, and we need protocols in the themes or the thematics of sexual education, health, work, economic realms, to prevent harassment, violation, and violence against women, with authorities like the police and security institutions or judicial institutions that I'll ensure that justice is done. We find a trend that is important to highlight is that the way that justice is approached in our documentary, not most than half, not 75, but most than half of our participants consider justice to be punitive, not reformative or not transitional or not any type of other justice, but more like through punishment. So higher levels or higher years for perpetrators, more jail, more reforms to the penal code, criminalizing people rather than engaging on reinsertion. So this is very important to note. In terms of other actors identified that could engage in the solutions for gender-based violence eradication or elimination, a lot of conversation was instilled upon the role that feminist women, that feminist activists played, and how culture or other non-governmental organizations and on human rights and collectives, as well as community level and civic society actors could play. But that was up to a very small percentage. So as you can see here, very small numbers of people name these actors as part of the solutions. So in order to end this presentation and open up for questions, and we are very excited to share with you this report in conversations in English. If you're interested, please let me know. Following us at nataliabonilla.org, or soon on December 15, when we are going to be launching the website on sermujerenlatinoamerica.com. What we found is that the way that we approach solutions in this continent is through the lenses of future generations. So we are often talking about education and public policies to help the future generations not experience the violence, but it's not like what are the solutions that we can start feeling or experiencing today, like now that we are living, not leave it to the children. So that's an area of opportunity to start working on. The second area of opportunity is that there's a high level of responsibility and a whole paternalistic view that the state is the one in charge that should engage on peace initiatives or, eradicating gender-based violence, that's his job, its job. And there's not enough conversation on where our personal actions or our personal decisions or our personal role is in the fight to make these elimination of violence against women possible at a personal and community level as well. And the third thing that we found is that there's a lot of conversation on education and public policy without necessarily engaging in other forms of elimination of violence, without of violence against women. And there's this misunderstanding or this over understanding that through gender perspective education we can find peace, or that through gender perspective education we can find gender equality, which is not the case. For that you need other things to happen, because we cannot forget that in spite of all the circumstances of gender perspective education or gender equality initiatives, it is important to note that we still living in cultures of violence. And for cultures of violence to be deconstructed, a whole different conversation needs to happen on cultures of peace. That is not what's happening. We also need to engage on other conversations on peace education, which leads us as well to a whole different level of question, which is how can we start talking transnationally without homogenizing the discourses of women's rights or women's equality or gender equality or gender equity. In which way we're talking on addressing this? In our documentary, what we found is that participants from Chile, Paraguay, Bolivia were often talking about this liberal agenda of international organizations trying to impose the way that feminist movements should take place in the region. And they fund organizations in Chile, for example. That was one of the calls. In Chile, for example, they fund through campaigns like local organizations, local feminist organizations, to engage in campaigns for, gender equality, for the Agenda 2030, trying to help, like reach all these goals. But local women do not feel represented by these liberal agendas from these top organizations. And they are denouncing that feminist movements are trying to find their place without these external pressure on what they should do or how they should think about progress or about being better or about being safe, So that's a whole different conversation that we are very excited for you to engage upon in your own country. And wondering with this last question, what are we building? What are we leaving? And what are we telling each other? One of the things that really struck me about this map is the level of if everything was created first through the mind, it is through the mind that we can start changing all these structures. Because once, all these parliament, all these buildings, or these social forms of organizations started once in a mind through an idea, and then that idea became possible. So there's hope, there's opportunities for us to grow. My conversation and my invitation is to also look upon your own self level of recognition, and what are the levels of violence that you are experiencing yourself, and what are the stories that you are telling, and what do these stories tell about you and as a collective. How much of your own speech and your own testimonial is from you versus influenced by what the media tells you or what the feminist collective tells you that is happening outside. Like, what do you really believe? I was struck very much by the work of Masaru Emoto, which is a Japanese scientist, and he wrote Messages of Water. And one of the things that he said was that when water, you speak good words and you place good words on water, it forms crystals, beautiful crystals. But when you start talk bad to the water or dirty words, etc., the water turns filthy. And that was like an analogy for how women and human beings talk to themselves. So if we are 70% composed of water, what are the words that we continue saying to each other? And yes, we need to continue denouncing violence, but in which ways is denouncing violence becoming the norm? But rather, when is focusing on the solutions and on conversations on solving it the norm, you know, and through other lenses, not through punitive lenses or not through, you know, other violent forms of behavior to engage on stopping violence, because, you know, like that's part of colonial practices that we continue stealing upon on these countries. And one of the things that is a legacy of the systemic racism and the systemic colonialism wounds that continue being part of our continent and region. So I hope that you loved this presentation. It was very interesting to talk to you in English, and I look forward to your comments, and please do let me know if you're interested. Remember to look for the website on December 15th and download the ebook on the Spanish version. Thank you so much for tuning in, and talk to you soon.